There you go. So section H is background knowledge, or background knowledge is factorization. Don't forget your stat box. I got notes on factorization. Does anyone notice anything weird so far? Factorization is kind of spelled funny. I think that's like the British spelling. I'm not 100% sure, but that's the way it's spelled in the text. So you might see that every now and then, just kind of alternative spellings. I don't care if you spell it with a Z. That's fine. So we're gonna start with what should you remember about factorization, or what do you remember? Even if what you remember is like a deep hatred, that's okay. What do you guys remember about factoring so far? Like from the past however many years? If you get taught it in Algebra 1, you review it in geometry, for sure advanced geometry. I'm not 100% sure if you're reviewing regular geometry, and you do it in trig. So anything you guys remember about factoring? Yep, that's it. That's factoring. Very good. There are other different types of factoring too. Probably the first factoring you ever talked about in elementary school. You guys remember greatest common factor? Way back. So that's going to come into play today as well. You got anything else to remember? Okay. So first we're going to look at this beautiful chart. I don't expect you to have time to fully write this down. At the end of the hour, I'll let you guys come up and take a photo of it, like on your phone if you want to. It's not in your textbook, but it's in the CD that's in your textbook. So if you want to look at this chart at home, or, I'm going to post my notes to my Google Classroom and my website later. So if you want to look at this later, you've got some other options. But it kind of tells us what to do. So first, you've got your expression, and really the first thing you want to do is take out any common factors, or like look for a GCF. Pretty much every single time, just take a glance. Do I have common factors? After you do that, then you kind of look for the different types. So kind of like what I like to call the Cliq Factoring is when I've got just an invisible 1 in front, or no number in front of that squared term. Do you guys remember just taking the factors of the last term and add or subtract to the middle term, going right to your parentheses? So we're going to have a couple like that are kind of like the Cliq Factoring. Otherwise, we have these special types. And my suggestion for looking for this is if you take out your greatest common factor, if it's not like the Cliq Factoring, is to kind of look for perfect squares. So look for those perfect squares, and this is going back to what we were talking about yesterday. Remember those special types of expansions where that middle term drops out? Can I get a nod if you were here yesterday? Remember that? All right. So that's kind of what that's going for. And then, last but not least, when you've got a number out front, and that's what I did on the daily C today, and you have to split up the middle term. I call that group factoring, or factor by grouping. The IB calls it like factoring with splitting the X term. It's the same thing. So what we will do, I'm going to put this picture actually just like this on my Google Class as well, so that you guys can go back and look at it. I'll just have that image up for you, so you can go online and get that later. So you know you don't have time to write down the whole thing. We're going to start with these steps. So I would write down these steps. Now, keep in mind that these steps are not for every single problem. Some problems you will factor out the GCF and be done. Some problems will have a 1 in front and you will boom, go right to the answer. This is for like the tougher problems like the one that I did on today's daily challenge. So if you need to do factor by grouping, if you need to factor by splitting the X term, again, also called by grouping. These are the steps. We will do an example with all these steps also listed on the board, so you'll be able to see these steps as we do a problem next. But you multiply a times c. So keep in mind that is when we have x squared plus bx plus c. So you multiply the first number by the last number. So I did that here. 2 times 1 is 2. And then you find the factors of that number that add up to the middle number. So the factors of that product that add up to the middle number. So, excuse me, that's what I did here as well. Once you find those factors, you replace them in the middle. So whatever those two factors are, you replace that middle one and put those in. So all those steps kind of bring me to here. Once you get to here, then you have to finish factoring and factor that stuff by grouping. Are we all clear that these aren't the steps for every single type of problem? Okay, that seemed to kind of confuse some people last hour. Okay, so those words are still right up here, so you can kind of see all those steps as we go through this problem. So the first example, we are going to factor by grouping or by splitting the x term. 8x squared plus 22x plus 15. Now I know that there exists people that can do this in their heads and they do like a guess and check method, and if that is you, you can continue to do you. I cannot help you guess and check because that's guessing, but this way it works, and it works all the time. So if I start first by finding AC, so I have to multiply 8 times 15, and I usually just like to write that off to the side. I'm going to write it here as well just for these notes, so it goes along with it. So I multiplied 8 times C. 8 times 15 is 120. Now I look for factors of 120 that add up to middle term. So I want something that adds up to 22. You've got two options here. If you know what it is, if it's like just jumping out at you, go ahead and go for it. If you don't, start listing all the factors, like 1 times 120, and 2 times 60, and 3 times 40, and so on. Does this jump out to anyone on this one? Okay. Yeah? Was it jumping out? Yeah, 10 and 12. Because if 10 times 12 equals 120, but 10 plus 12 equals 22. So it's really just how you feel with the factors. Do not be ashamed, especially with like a big one like this. If you got to write a long list and get them all down, do that. And then find out which ones add up to that middle term. So then we're going to split it up and take 10 and 12 and put it where the 22 is. So you guys do not have to take up this much space. I just want to make sure I have space. So I'm splitting that up, and it does not matter the order, 10x and 12x. I would not write those zeros that long on your papers, but for the purpose of your notes, that's how I did it today. Then you can bring down the last term and bring down the first term. Now, I have to tell you, we are going to be factoring right away in Chapter 1, and you will have to do some of this factoring even when we do trig. So you're going to do this later. It's going to have sine and cosine in it. So that's next semester. We'll get there. But are there any questions on any piece to this point that is not going for you? While I'm on that topic, has anyone factored with the box before? If you like that, you can still do it. And if you need me to like give you a refresher of how to do this in the box, I probably can. Okay? So anyone else too, if you are like, Miss Grady taught me the box when I was a freshman, I can help you do that, okay? So now what we do is we split it up into the two groups, and I like to visually split it up and actually draw a line that physically I can see the two different sides. If you do this, please make sure that this operation that came after the 10x, this plus, stays in the second group. So if you split it up, you do want that operation in the second group. So you don't forget about it. You want to make sure that that is in the second group. Now we just look at the two different problems separately. So I'm going to completely ignore the second group. Just looking at 8x plus 10, I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor. So when I look at 8 and 10, they're both even numbers. I can take out 2. I've got x squared and x, so I can take out a 2x. So that's like that greatest common factor that we were talking about earlier today. Now I do need to leave what's left here. So remember, this is kind of like a division. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. X squared divided by x, I'll just have x left. Plus 10 divided by 2 is 5. And those x's would cancel out. So it's just the first group. Is everybody okay? So then to the second group, whatever operation you have here, you do want to write it down so you don't forget about it. So that was a plus sign in that second group, so I'm going to write that plus sign down. Sometimes it is a minus sign in there, so we'll talk about some examples of that. Now when I look at these numbers, 12x and 15, 12 and 15, I can take out a 3. That's the greatest common factor that goes into both. I cannot take out an x because I don't have an x by the 15. So now when I divide, 12 divided by 3 is 4, and 15 divided by 3 is 5. So I have 4x plus 5. You should see that those parentheses are the same. If they are not the same, you made a mistake along the way. You know, maybe you didn't take out the greatest common factor, just a common factor. You might have had an issue with your signs, but those parentheses should be the same. So then I can write just one of those down, 4x plus 5, and then what I have left is 2x plus 3, and that goes into my other parenthesis. Are you guys remembering this? Even if you don't feel 100% great about it, are we remembering it? Because I know that you've done it before. So we're going to go over, I think, 6 more examples. And then there's 2 examples I'm just going to talk about. We're not going to fully do. We're going to go over 6 examples. Now these examples are all different types. So they're not going to all be like this. Some of them are going to be much easier and much fewer steps. Remember to look for GCF, and if you look for GCF and if it's not one of those easy factoring ones, then keep an eye out for perfect squares. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to try these 2, see what you can remember, and then we will go over those. Okay, so for number 2, remember, first things first, we check for a greatest common factor. When I look at 3x squared minus 12x, I've got 3 and 12. What's my GCF there? Yes, thank you, 3. Plus, I can take out an x. So then, when I kind of divide that out, I just have an x left, or 1x minus 4. And that is fully factorized. That's all I gotta do on that one. So, like I said, some of them are not as many steps. Now, when I look at number 3, I've got 4x minus 1. I check for a GCF. I don't have a GCF besides 1. It's not one of those easy factoring ones because I have a number in front of the x squared. So the next thing to help myself, and there are other options here, but I can check for perfect squares. 4x squared is a perfect square, and so is 1. So my little shortcut here is that I can jump right down to my 2 binomials here. I can square root this. So the square root of 4 is 2. So I got 2x and 2x. And I've got the square root of 1, well that's just 1. So I'm going to have 2x plus 1 and 2x minus 1. So that's just using that little shortcut, the difference of squares. Now, let's say that doesn't work for you. Another thing you could do is you could insert a 0 in the middle if you wanted to. You guys know where that 0 is coming from? Because there's no x term. And you could do it the long way in factor by grouping if you want to. If that works for you, by all means, you can do that. But it is kind of nice. It saves you a lot of hassle if you start to remind yourself, oh yeah, I should check for perfect squares. It saves yourself some time. All right, see what you got on these 2. Just realized there are no fans on and it's not completely awful temperature in here. Isn't that amazing? It's gonna be like a really Thursday thing. It's not a million degrees. Alright, I'm gonna give you guys just a little bit more because we got still working, and then we'll go over these ones. One thing that I should say is that if you really like factor by grouping, you can use it on pretty much any trinomial. But looking at this, I got a 1 up front, so I can use some Cliq Factoring here. I can just think of factors of 36 that combine to give me negative 12. So you can list all those factors of 36 if you need to. But 6 and 6. So I can jump right to x, whoops, not plus, because I got to get a negative 12. X minus 6 and x minus 6. I can skip all those extra steps only if there's 1 in front. But here's the deal. If you don't want to skip the steps, if that confuses you, like trying to remember when to do the steps and when not to, you can still do this process and you will still get the same answer at the end. Does that make sense? Same thing on this one, because I am going to check, and I didn't say it out loud, there's no GCF here, not between all three. Yeah, those two, but not there. Here, I do have a GCF. 3, 12, and 9, I can take out a 3. So then I have 1x squared plus 4x plus 3. Once again, now that I'm at this point, I can just go ahead and do my Cliq Factoring, my factors of 3 that add up to 4. Well, that's 1 and 3. So I've got x plus 1 and x plus 3. Don't forget to bring that 3 that you took out right away. Now that's a quicker way to do it, but if you don't like that, if that's not feeling like your style, and you just want to group it all the way, then you can go ahead and keep grouping it. Just make sure when you get to the last group that you check that you don't have any like greatest common factors at the end. You can do that too. Okay, we've got, let's see, 2 more that we're going to do. And in my second hour, I did this next problem. And I did it like a long way, and I took a billion steps, and then someone was like, couldn't you just do this, something way easier? So I'll see what you guys think of. It was like way easier than what I did, but what I did still worked. And what I did was I did this whole process, and it still worked. It took a lot longer. Anyone come up with a quicker way to do that first one? What are you thinking, Michael? Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to change what you said just slightly, but you have the exact right idea. We can take out a negative 1. Like when I did the second hour, I just didn't see that. So you know, our brains all think differently, and that's okay. But I can factor out a negative 1. So if I take that out, it's kind of like the multiplying part. So now that's positive x squared and negative 3x minus 10. But just be careful that you don't lose this. So you have to bring that negative 1 back in at the end. Now, I've got some Cliq Factoring because I can think of factors of negative 10 that combine to equal negative 3. So if you do have a negative, my suggestion is to just write down your factors and then remember that one of them has to be negative and one has to be positive. In this case, to get a negative 3, I'm going to have a negative 5. So I've got x minus 5 and x plus 3, and then bring down that negative 1. Wait, not 3, that's a 2. Sorry, guys. Clearly I wrote a 2 there, just not in the right spot. Now, if you wanted to, you could have done the whole multiplication situation and do all of that, and that is definitely what I did second hour. I multiplied that negative 1, and I got the same solution at the end. But just kind of showing you some different things. Number 7, we don't have a GCF. Those are not perfect squares. You have got to factor that by grouping unless you do the magical stuff in your head that I can't do. Are you guys at the point where you want me to start going through that one right away? Yep, all right. So since I have to factor by grouping, I'm going to multiply, and I've got negative 20. Same thing, I can write those factors down. And then I need factors that will combine to give me a negative 1. So if I use a negative 5 and a positive 4, that will work out there. And bring that stuff down. Actually, I'm going to switch this around, and it's totally fine. You don't have to switch it. I just want to show you guys something. Truth be told, it does not matter the order you do those. In fact, the way I switched it, I think makes it more tricky, but I have a reason for why I switched it to show you guys something. So if you did have them the other way, that's totally fine. Your work will be different, but your answer will be the same. So now here, 2x squared plus 4x, I can take out a 2x. And when I divide that out, I have x plus 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And this is why I wanted to show you guys that. If you do have a minus sign right here, you do want to take out a negative factor. Now, 5 and 10, I can take out a 5. But here's the deal. Since I take out a negative factor, it swaps these signs. Because negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1x. Negative 10 divided by negative 5 does turn that into a positive 2. So I just wanted to make sure you guys saw that before you got to your assignment. Now, if I would have had it the way I originally had it, I wouldn't worry about it at all, but it will come up. So I've got x plus 2 and 2x minus 5. Any questions? Any of this factoring stuff that you think might help everybody? Okay, so we're not gonna do these ones. I'm just gonna talk about it real quick. So when you see something like this, you have to use yesterday's stuff with today's stuff. So make sure you FOIL this, then subtract the 9, and then you have to actually refactor it. Here you're gonna have to FOIL both of those. Be careful with that subtraction sign. Combine your like terms and refactor it. So you go over more of those if you get confused when you get to the assignment. Do you guys have any tips? Anyone that likes factoring maybe have anything to share that's a tip? My tips are kind of basically what I said, like GCF first, check for perfect squares. If it's easy factoring, go for it. And then when you have to group factor, group factor. All right, I'm going to pass this out, but I'm just going to go ahead and put this back up. So if you do want to take a photo of that,